Yeah, so hi everyone, and welcome to our series where we interview computer science faculty about their job search and interviewing experience to basically help future faculty candidates. So today we are here with Reut Milski, who will join Bar Ilan University as an assistant professor this year. So Reut is primarily interested in multi-agent systems, robotics, and also HCI. So with that, welcome, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me, Manuel. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great. So as a first question, when will you actually start with your new position and move to Israel?
So I still don't have an exact date. I guess that will be probably for next year's, like next academic year, 2022.
And can you also briefly introduce yourself a bit more? So what did you do basically before now starting as a new assistant professor?
Yeah, I started my studies in Israel in Ben Gurion University. I did all of my degrees there from my undergraduate to my PhD. Um, when I looked for for a postdoc position in Israel, it's almost impossible to get a faculty position if you did not had a postdoc abroad somewhere. So I looked for places, and Peter's lab had a vacancy. I talked to Peter Stone. So this is how I got to where I'm currently at the University of Texas at Austin.
Yeah, that's also a bit similar, I guess, to many places in Europe where it's basically expected that you do some kind of postdoc before applying. Is it also similar that the PhD in Israel is then a bit shorter compared to, for example, in the US?
Yeah, in Israel, a PhD is 4 years, 5 years. If someone goes into their 6th year, that's considered very long. But we also a lot of times have a master's. So if you take that together, then I guess it turns out about the same time.
Makes sense. And what is your research nowadays on?
Yeah, so the main research vision that I'm trying to promote now is constructing a seeing eye robot that can guide blind people around, avoid obstacles. And this is a very fascinating question for multi-agent systems, HRI. It's a very rich problem with many different uh, sub-applications and subtasks that you can solve. So I really look forward, and I think that this is one of the things that I talked about a lot during this interview season about how I plan on promoting this idea.
Can you also tell us a bit more about Bar Ilan University and especially how Bar Ilan University fits into the landscape in the academic landscape in Tel Aviv and also in Israel?
Definitely. In Israel, in total, I think there are 6 big universities, and Bar Ilan is one of them. In terms of robotics and symbolic AI, multi-agent systems, they're one of the top, if not the top one, department in computer science. They have a lot of great researchers, Gal Kaminka, Sarit Kraus, Noah Agmon in robotics, and also Ido Dagan, Yoav Goldberg, Reut Rafati in NLP. So these are the main 2 areas that Bar Ilan is, that I am close to what Bar Ilan has to offer. So for me, that was really a perfect choice to apply there. I applied very sparsely. Out of the 6 big universities, I applied to uh, 2. You might say 2.5. I don't know. So yeah, I think I applied to 2, and I knew that if I'm gonna get a position, I prefer getting one of these. And if something did not work out this year, I would um, reapply again next year. This is something that Peter allowed me to do, which was great. He gave me the opportunity to apply this year and continue working in his lab until next year if I want to extend my stay here and reapply next year. Especially with COVID, we didn't know how it's gonna turn out.
I'm curious because you also mentioned 2.5. So is there any kind of anecdote that you want to explain or?
Oh, I don't know if that's for the relevant for a lot of people. Yeah, there is one place in Israel that is currently being transitioned from being a college to a university. And it's going to be the first private university in Israel. So I apply there as well. But
I see.
that's a bit of a nuance.
I see. And what does the academic system in Israel look like in general?
Yeah, in Israel, the academic system is mostly I think is more similar to the European one. All universities are public so far. And that means, for example, in terms of the salary that you're going to get, there is no point in negotiation because it's something that is standard across all departments. The only thing you can negotiate is the startup package.
And in terms of ranks, so do you also use the tenure track system, or is it more like the UK where you have this more or less tenured positions from the start, or don't have the concept of tenure?
Yeah, it's similar to the US and to most places with a tenure track. You start as an assistant professor and continue from there.
And how are students typically funded?
So students are funded fully for their first semester, maybe two if they need to. And then it's partially funded by the department and partially funded by their advisor.
Mhm.
And you can also, so the standard paying for a PhD is not very high, but you can enhance that with external grants. So you can reach a decent salary, not industry competitive, but still pretty good.
I see. And basically, since you mentioned that at the very beginning they are funded by the university for the first 1 or 2 semesters, so is this that students are centrally admitted to some kind of pool and then select their advisor, or is it that if you have a student that you want to hire, that the student directly works with you from the start?
If you know in advance that you're gonna advise a student from their first semester, then definitely you can work with them. And it's just that they will get some initial funding from the department. And this funding will then must be split between an advisor and the department. But it does give a lot of students an opportunity to explore a bit. And this is something that I personally encourage new students to explore a bit before locking on a specific advisor, because it's hard to know before you start working with someone if it's going to be a good connection or not.
I think that's good advice also in the sense that it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
So let's assume that you have some kind of friend that has accepted an offer at university in Israel and who has never been to Israel before. So what kind of advice would you have for this friend, for example, in terms of cultural differences or other advice?
Yeah, I think that the main thing that is unique in Israel is it's much less hierarchical and not a lot of protocol that accompanies processes. So it's very lean on the communication. So for example, when I told Bar-Ilan that I'm accepting their offer, I did not hear back from them. I had to send an email and say, I accepted the offer. Can you tell me that you send me an act that you've got this message? Because if there's nothing important or concrete to update or to continue with the process, then there's no reason in this communication. So I think this might be the most obvious thing that one will notice coming to Israel, that everything is very straightforward, very practical. You talk about things that you when you have something to update and not before that.
Sounds very efficient. In terms of application deadlines, are they aligned typically with the US kind of deadlines?
Yeah, so in most years they are pretty aligned. Israel has a maybe slightly earlier season. This year was unique. I applied for Israeli faculty positions in August, September, and in the US this season was I continued applying until the end of November, I think. So and then following that, I had my Israeli interviews, and only after I got some of the offers, I got my American interviews.
So I would say let's start chatting about the preparation phase. And there my first question is, how do you start preparing your application materials? And also what kind of resources did you utilize for preparing them?
Yeah, so when I just started preparing, I talked to many friends and colleagues who went through this process last year or a couple of years ago. I asked to see a couple of research statements from my friends. I was very fortunate to have Peter as a very hands-on mentor that could really help me. He gave me a lot of advice on my research statement. We had a couple of iterations on that. So, and he also gave me a lot of confidence to apply to specific places. One of the things he also gave me an advice before I started the interview season in the US is applying to the Rising Stars program, and that was also very useful. As a Rising Star, one of the things that you get is you get a lot of personal emails from department chairs that invite you to apply, which gives a lot of confidence to apply to places like MIT, Harvard, and yeah, that was really encouraging. So I do recommend anyone who can to apply to Rising Stars program or other programs like that. I think that might be one of the best things that you can do to prepare yourself.
Sounds like good advice. For those that are not familiar with the Rising Stars program, can you shortly introduce what its purpose is and how it works?
Yeah, Rising Stars is an annual conference for women applying in computer science and electrical engineering. In this, it's a day of some interesting panels and talks from women in academia in the US. And in this day, you also get a personal mentor that talks to you about your concerns, about the things that you're interested in, and also goes over your research statement. And one of the best things that they do is that they also go with you on the first 7 minutes of your job talk.
That sounds very useful.
It is, it is.
At what point in your career did you decide to apply for academic positions?
I think that after my bachelor's, I worked in the industry for a couple of years. And I think that it's deep down, I knew that once I go back to academia, I want to stay there as much as possible. And it was clear to me that this is a better choice for myself. I think that once I finished my master's, I already knew that I will be applying to academic positions once I graduate from my PhD. So it was a bit straightforward.
Oh, that was quite early.
Yeah.
And did you also apply for industrial positions, for example, industrial research labs or so?
So I did not focus my application at all on the industry. I was approached by one company who invited me to interview. So since it was a very known company, I decided that I do want to go through that process, even just to experience that. And eventually, the main reason I think that it did not work out eventually was because the type of research that I'm interested in is more suitable for academia. And this is something that I knew in advance. So I think overall, yeah, that was a good decision on my end, not to focus on industry applications too much. And I think that this is something that everyone who wants to apply in the beginning of a season should think with themselves. Is my research relevant more to academia or to industry? I think that's a very useful question to know what type of application you should go for.
So for you, it seems very clear what you wanted to do, that you wanted to focus on academic positions, like talking to your friends and so on, do you see that this is often like a clear kind of path? Or is it often also the case that people apply for both academic positions and positions in industry?
Yeah, I think that it's not very common that people know and have this strong opinion that they want to be in academia. And honestly, I think that people who are unsure should go and work for a company for a year or two. Most of the time, this doubt stems from the fact that people go through the academic process without ever actually working in a company for more than a semester, maybe in the summer or something like that. So people don't really know what it means. And most of the doubts, I think, come from this uncertainty. I think that the reason that I can be so confident in what I want to do is mostly because I did have some prior experience working in the industry. So I know that the type of work that I'm interested in is what is being done in academia.
Yeah, one important thing, of course, when interviewing is to have a great job talk. So what kind of approach did you take to bring your job talk to the best possible shape?
I think a couple of advice. The first one is something that I've heard from Scott Newcomb, who's a faculty at UT, and he gave a talk to people building their job talks. And he said that you should look at your past projects, what you've been working on so far, and try to understand what is the connection between the work that you've done in the past. What is the thing that you're most interested about? Because all of us as researchers at the end of our PhD already accumulated some experience, some projects, and some of them are not immediately related to one another. But out of all of the options that we've had, these are the projects we decided to work on, and there's a reason why. So if you can find that reason, that's the research goal that you want to pursue further, and this is what you should emphasize. And the second thing that I was thinking about is trying to think of a concrete challenge, problem that can be useful for to have a topic around my research for several years in the future, that I would be able to provide that as a motivation in grant proposals. And that was basically how I started thinking about the Sing iRobot Grad Challenge. So yeah, so I think that was really useful. People really like this idea, and it gave me a very easy way to communicate with people in interviews.
And what kind of suggestions do you have for getting strong recommendation letters and also in general on approaching letter writers?
Yeah, so I think that the best thing is to, it's hard to start thinking about recommendations once you need them. You should think about that a bit in advance. So make sure that by the time you need to have these recommendation letters, you've worked with people from different universities. It's more important, and I've heard that many times, it's better to have great reference letters from less known researchers than having very lukewarm letters from people who are well known in the academic world. So I think that the most important part is have collaborators that you can talk to and ask them for these types of reference letters by the time comes. I did ask one senior member in the community to write me a letter, even though we did not collaborate. But I did know that she was well aware of my research, and we had some academic connections that were not real collaborations, but she knew me well enough so she could write this letter, that it would be a good letter.
You already mentioned the Rising Star program, and in general, how important is it to do networking before going on the job market, to have a network and also, for example, contacts at the institution you are applying for?
Yeah, so By the way, I think this is another big difference between Israel and the US, maybe because there are only these few universities in Israel. Uh, a very good heuristic for me was to apply to universities where I know at least a couple of the faculty, because in Israeli universities that I'm not familiar with the faculty, the research areas are far enough from mine. It's easy to know everyone. In the US, you can't do that because there are so many. So oftentimes you do apply to a university that you're not familiar with, none of the researchers. So one of the ways, I think it's important if you can have some prior knowledge in people's minds before you apply. So if you can talk to a couple of faculty members, just send an email in the beginning of the season and tell them, I wish to apply to your department. I think that I can be a good fit. I think that my research can complement yours in this and that ways. Can you give me some tips or advice? Or if you would be willing to meet with me, I'll be happy to talk more. And some people agree to talk to me, even in very competitive universities. People found the time meeting with me and talk to me beforehand. And I think that that was very useful. It's not, there is no magic solution for that. There is no way that you can plan your way to make sure that you reach a specific position. There is a lot of independent variables that you can't control that will determine the final outcome, but I think that that really can help.
Great. We chatted now a bit about the preparation phase, and I would say that we can go over to interview invitations. And the first question there is, did you typically receive a direct interview or more like, for example, phone interviews before the full invitation?
Yeah, so again, I think this is very different between the US and Israel. In Israel, I had no preliminary interview. When I was invited, it was for a full day. And in the US, I always had a phone interview before the full day visit.
And how did these few phone interviews typically go? And also, were the questions that you received, were these questions tailored specifically for you? Or was this like standard questions that probably every candidate likely received?
So one place gave me a list of questions beforehand,
Mhm.
which was really convenient. Other places didn't do that, but I think there are 10 to 15 questions that all places ask. So if you cover these questions, you can come pretty prepared. I did not have personally tailored questions in the phone stage.
Do you still remember some of these questions that you received?
Yeah, I think that the main ones are what's your research vision? And questions that make sure that you have a concrete vision at this point, that you can already perform independent research, that you're mature enough academically to be able to build your own lab. So a lot of the questions were about that. How many students would you like to have in the beginning after a couple of years? What is the ideal size of a lab that you can imagine? What courses do you think you can teach?
And I guess also why this institution often comes up, right?
Uh, yeah, a lot of times people ask, why are you interested in this institution? For me, it was pretty, it's a bit of a template because my research can complement the things being done in your department nicely because, and then you do a bit of homework and you can add a couple of sentences.
Speaking of homework, so when you got the full day invitations and also the schedule, how did you prepare for the one-on-one meetings?
Yeah, so again, a unique stage that I did in Israel was contacting colleagues and friends from that university, because I know at least one person from each university, and asking about specific people I should, the way I should interact with them. So that was also useful, I guess. And in general, for all places, both in Israel and in the US, um, I went over the list of faculty members, and even before I got the schedule, I identified the people that will be likely be the people I'll talk to. that are the most relevant to my area, and also the department chair and graduate studies chair. So I made sure that I have these names, their research interests, and for each of these, I read one paper or more, and I made sure that I can find one potential collaboration or an idea for a potential collaborations between us. And I think that that was really useful. And also, I really made an Excel sheets with the names and all these entries. And one of the columns I had that was pretty useful was um, a work that ideally is mine, but not necessarily, that I can share with them that I think that they will find interesting. This is something that Peter also told me, that the best outcome of an interview that you can have is that the person in front of you learns something new. Eventually, especially in academia, people are curious, people are interested in learning and getting new information. So if you can provide such information for them, that will be something that they will really appreciate.
Oh, that sounds like excellent advice. I think I should have done that.
It was useful, and it was fun. I think that out of all of my friends that I know, I enjoyed this interview season. I enjoyed my interviews because first of all, I came prepared and I had a lot of conversation topics with my interviewers. So I really enjoyed these talks.
As a follow-up question also about the schedule. So how long before the interview, before the visit, did you actually receive the schedule?
So one place sent me the schedule a week in advance, but other places send them a couple of days before that. So I had to fill in for a couple of people that I did not include in my list.
And I mean, some of these institutions, they also ask whether you want to have any people included in your schedule that you really want to talk to. Was this for you the case?
No, I was not asked that at any point. In one place, I did ask to meet with specific people. Some of them did appear in the schedule and some of them didn't. And when I started my day with my host at the place, I asked them why didn't I get to talk to these people, and they said that it was just a too busy schedule. They couldn't fit in more people, and that didn't work out. But yeah, it wasn't something personal that the person did not want to talk to me or something like that.
And speaking about hosts, so what was the role of your host in general?
I don't think that my host had a lot to do. Maybe it was because this was all of my season was online. I did not have any in-person interviews. The host was the first Zoom meeting of the day. And if I had a question, I just emailed them. But other than that, I didn't have any special connections. The host is not a person that is your advocate or your champion necessarily. It's just the person that was selected to host you that day.
And the interview invitation that you received, was it sent by the host or by someone else?
Sometimes it was by the department chair, and sometimes it was my specific host. I think that once we've got to the job talk stage, the invitations were sent from the department chair and not the host.
Okay, yeah, great. I would say let's continue chatting a bit about interviewing itself. And the first question there is, what was the structure of the visit at Bar Ilan University like?
Yeah, so because it's in a completely different time zone, my day starts when their work day ends. I had my interview day split into two of my mornings. In that case, I think it's easier than going the other way around, where you have to interview in your evening. And I think that for you, that was the case, right? You are in Zurich, and when you apply to US universities, the time that you had to interview was in the evening.
Right, so mostly started, I think, at 4 p.m. and until 12 p.m. or so.
Yeah. So people talk to me from there of 4 p.m., which is my 8 a.m., up until, I don't know, 10, 11 p.m. And I really appreciated that. I told them as well that I really appreciate the fact that they can accommodate my schedule like that. In the US, it was easier. It was a day 9 to 5 thing, and that was it.
And during the visit, when you had the job talk, you had the one-on-ones, I guess you also met with the chair, for example, with the dean, with students also.
Yeah, so in Israeli universities, and that might also be because of the time differences, I had one-on-ones with different researchers. I met with the department chair, but I did not meet with students or with other deans. So I think that was primarily because of the time difference.
And did you also observe any other kind of differences to, for example, the places you interviewed with in the US?
So the student meeting was one of the main differences.
And in terms of interviewing, I mean, one-on-ones can go very differently, right? And I, for example, observed that some interviewers are rather active and proactive. They ask you questions. They want to chat about research, and some others are rather passive and want you to lead the discussion, I guess. So did you also observe this, and what are your thoughts on this?
I think I've observed several types of researchers and interviewers. There is mostly more junior researchers that feel like it's an interview now, and they're very rigid. They have a clear set of questions that they must complete by the end of the interview. So there's not much time for small talk.
Mm.
More senior researchers, often I felt that were more fluid in the questions that they had. And like you said, oftentimes they were more passive and let me lead the discussion. I did have one 30-minute interview about living in the city that the university is at, and how lovely is this attraction or that attraction, and that was it. We did not talk about research at all. Later on, I learned that this person was really in favor of me, so they didn't feel like challenging me necessarily or questioning. They knew what my research was about. They found that interesting enough, and that was it. So you can find all sorts of interviewers. And I think that one of the most important parts is to know to adjust your behavior to theirs.
Right. It's also interesting what you mentioned. I made exactly the same experience also in terms of, like you said, especially very fresh assistant professors. They typically ask many of the standard questions, and they ask the question basically one by one. And more of the senior people, they just start chatting with you about research or about other things, like you pointed out.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, during a visit, you typically meet mostly with people that are outside your research area. So how did you present your research to them?
Yeah, so again, a difference between Israel and the US. In Israel, half of the people I met were from area relevant to mine, or people that I was familiar with, and we even collaborated with some of them. I even collaborated with them. So in Israel, it wasn't a real problem to present my research, because even if they're not familiar with my research, they were familiar with the research of their team members or their other department members. So it was close enough that I could say, this is like this person is doing, but this is my spin-off on this. In the US, usually I think that one of the things that really helped me was the Sing iRobot Grand Challenge, because it was a very clear, concrete idea. This is something that a lot of different research areas can find some connection. And at the abstract level, it's general enough that I can discuss that with everyone, not just with researchers. I give public talks as well about this project, and this is something that people can relate to. And more specifically, it gives a nice link to different type of researchers to talk about specific collaborations.
I should have asked this already before, but you mentioned, what is it called? What challenge?
Oh, the Sing iRobot Grand Challenge.
Right. Can you also tell us more about this?
Yeah, so this was the idea that led my research statement. I published a Blue Sky idea paper on that in recent AMAS. It's basically a definition of a new challenge to design a robot that can lead blind people around, and it presents a very interesting problem where you have a person and a robot that need to work together, and their goal is shared. It is the person's goal, and the robot needs to provide a type of a surrogate for that, for the eyes of the person. It needs to understand the goals and the intentions of the person behind whatever it decides to do. One of the most important things, I think the most interesting things that seeing eye dogs do is that they learn how to intelligently disobey. They know when not to behave like they were told because they see something that the person does not see. For example, if a car comes and they want to cross the road, they know to stop even though the person tells them to go ahead. So being able to understand this context, to be able to understand both the desires of the person, but also the current state of the environment, is something that is fascinating, and that's a very interesting challenge. And with respect to the robotics aspect of that, how do you create that interaction? How do you make that disobedience in a way that the person understands, but also that is still safe? So it's really a very rich problem, and that was something that really helped me structure both my research statement, as I said, and my job talk and interviews with people.
I see. Okay. Like, did you receive any very unexpected questions during the interviewing process? Any memories about yeah, special kind of questions?
Well, unfortunately, I do remember one unpleasant question that in the beginning of the interview, before everything started, the person just goes up and say, "Before we start, I just want to ask, do you have a two-body problem?"
Or
Which is unpleasant. I think that in some places you're not even legally, you can't ask this type of questions before you start, before you interview a person.
mhm.
And yeah, it made me, I must say that it shook me off a bit. It made me feel a bit uncomfortable.
Right. I mean, that would also have made me extremely uncomfortable, especially if it
Yeah,
was during the job talk you said, or before the job talk.
before the job, yeah, it
Or
was straight in the beginning, and yeah, that was really weird. I try to say that I'm not hiding the fact that I'm married, I have a daughter, and that was something that I talked about freely in my interviews.
mhm.
Um, but I was also, I try to shift a bit the discussion to say that a two-body problem is not necessarily a problem. Like the fact that there are two bodies, that doesn't necessarily imply that there is going to be a problem about that. So I would just revise that term altogether to be something else.
I mean, did the person afterwards provide an explanation why this question was asked, or did
No.
you talk with your host about it also, or?
No, I did not mention it. I didn't want to make that a big of a deal, but it does happen still, and that's still something that is being brought up in interviews.
Yeah, I guess it's also an uncomfortable position to tell this to your host, right? Because if it escalates up, then it might hurt you at the end. It's a difficult decision. I mean, a difficult situation.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant situation. There's a reason why these questions should not be asked in interviews, but yeah,
Mhm.
luckily that was the only thing that was like that.
Yeah, so you said that you met with students at US universities. So how did this kind of meetings go? Like, what did you chat with students?
Yeah, so these meetings were lightweight in the sense that I did not have to do any homework for that. Usually, I didn't know who the students were before the meeting itself. I usually like to start with introducing myself and ask them about their research interests and who they work with, who is their advisor. Um, And usually from that, we started talking about research, and that was it.
And how did the meetings with the chair and dean typically go? Like how did you interact with them? How did the meetings typically develop?
With the chair, I think that if we had a common research interest, then we talk about research.
Mm.
Otherwise, we would talk more about administrative issues in the department, how everything is being run, if there is some specific aspects of the departmental culture that is unique from other universities. Do they eat lunch together and when? Similar with the deans, usually it depends dean of what, and that determined the topic of our discussion.
Great. So I would say that after having now chatted a bit about interviewing, that we discuss about the time when you heard back from the institutions and then also making the decision. So first of all, how was the waiting process for you? Because you apply, you interview, everything is exciting, and then you have to wait often for a while until you hear about any new developments, right?
Yeah, I think that there are two critical stages in the application process that are very difficult mentally, emotionally. It's tiring. The first one is the actual application, when you need to send click, or when you need to click send, for when you apply to a top tier university or to a place that you really want to go. I remember after clicking the submit button, I had to just unwind, go and lay down for a couple of minutes, just take a couple of breaths, because it's exciting. It's really something that you feel like it's very it's a big thing, and it is. But it's good to remember that applications can also happen years after, and you can always reapply next year if you want to, or go on a short postdoc. So and you don't have to think about all of that when you just hit send. And so that's the first very stressful moment. The other is waiting, like you said, the uncertainty. For me, it took almost 6 months, with the differences between the Israeli academia and the US. I've been hanging out to dry for a very long time in some places, and that was emotionally stressful. The one thing that helped me a lot was exercising and making sure that I'm taking care of myself.
That sounds like a good strategy. And I mean, you're doing Pilates, right? I know from your website.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm a Pilates instructor, and during this interview season, it was busy. I didn't have too much time, but I made sure that I exercise as much as I can.
Yeah, also used a similar strategy to
Yeah.
cope with the distress. And after receiving your first offer, how did you then proceed?
So after my first offer, I was a bit relieved. As I said, I had a very long season, and I knew that a lot is coming ahead. So I did not allow myself to focus too much on that. I had to move on quickly. I did celebrate that evening. We opened a bottle of wine, my husband and I, and celebrated the fact that no matter what, we have a place to go now.
Mhm.
But after that, we just continued working on the rest of the places and making sure that I come as ready as I can. Yeah, and then it took a while until I was able to reject offers.
And how did you converge towards a decision?
I think that for us, one of the things that determined our decision eventually was the fact that it is easier to be close to family, and the fact that Israel is our home. So um, even given some great opportunities I had in the US, I decided that for us, the best thing at this point in our life is to be in Israel. And luckily, Israel has some great universities, so I don't have to compromise about my research as well.
And you already mentioned it, that you also have a husband. So how could you resolve basically this two-party situation?
Yeah, so as I said to that interviewer as well, I don't see that as a problem. Maybe it's because of the occupation of my husband. He's a software engineer. Um, here in Austin, he worked in a software company as a product manager. So both in Israel, both in the US, almost everywhere you can find jobs in that area, and that's an occupation with high demand. So in that sense, I think that it's easier for us.
Did you also do a second visit after, or did you stay in contact with people, like get some more information to make your decision?
No, after my in-person visits, I didn't have the time anymore because the in-person visits were in the US, and I had an offer waiting in Israel. So I had to decide fast. Once I got all of the final offers, I had to make a quick decision.
Yeah, great. So can slowly wrap up now. And the first question that I had was, I mean, you already mentioned that you also have a child, and what kind of advice would you have basically for other mothers interviewing, and like, are there any kind of considerations that, for example, other people wouldn't have?
Yeah, I think especially for young mothers with babies, my daughter is 4, so it's becoming easier with time. But if you have smaller kids, younger kids, it's nice to have a mentor who's a parent. Probably if you're a mother, then having another mother, that would be the easiest and one that you can most relate to give you some advice on how to manage that. And I think that I had a couple of women like that in my life that gave me much support and assistance, and even the fact that someone can understand what you are going through can really be helpful. In terms of taking care of the kids, it's just like working from home. All other types of work that you do, you need to make sure that you can concentrate and that they're not around too much to walk inside. That happened to me during a postdoc interview. Um, that my husband was not home. My daughter was already asleep, and during the interview, she started crying, and I had to pick her up. She was a baby, and hold her in my hands during the interview, which eventually was nice because the person I was talking to really liked kids. So we had a wonderful conversations about that. But that's something that generally you try to avoid, mostly for your own concentration, for the fact that it's harder to concentrate when you have other things to think about.
All right. Sounds like you also need, in general, lots of organization and coordination in order to then be able to concentrate on the hiring season, right?
Definitely. But in general, I think that if we've reached the point that we are interviewing to become as professors, you need to have a lot of organization in your life anyway, right?
Probably. What role did communication platforms play in your interviewing season? Like, I mean, we both have been, for example, part of this Future Faculty Forum Slack workspace. So do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, so the Future Faculty Forum was really useful. It's a place where many applicants, mostly in the US, but not just, can come together, ask questions about the interview process, about specific experiences they encounter. You and I had some great discussions when we prepared for interviews. We help one another do mock interviews. One thing that I would say that might be a disadvantage, and each person needs to find the right portion of immersedness they want in such groups. It can be also stressful because when you have a lot of people going through the same thing and all of the problems of everyone just flowed up in this type of communication channel, which is what you want to have, it can also be stressful and overwhelming. So you need to be careful about how much you get yourself involved in that.
Yeah, I remember also, for example, there was at some point a poll about thank you notes, and like I, for example, I only wrote thank you notes to my host at the beginning, and after seeing that most people actually write thank you notes to everyone, yeah, I also felt a bit more under distress.
Yeah. Once you realize that you could have done things differently, or that some people get stressed because of something that you did not think about, you can find a lot of reasons to of concerns.
Right. Yeah, you already talked a bit about Peter, your postdoc advisor. And do you want to comment on the role of mentors in the whole process in general?
I think having as many mentors as possible is good. You can't hear too many opinions. You need to know to set the right volume to each opinion. And if something suits one person, doesn't necessarily mean that this will be the right thing for you. But the more advice I got a clear view of what I should do. Like I said, I had some people that I could talk to and relate to about being a mother in this process. I had some people talking that are new faculty and can give me advice about the interview process. Some people like yourself that we had a lot of great talks as interviewees. Um, Senior members that can give a wider view of the hiring season. So it's great to have as many people you can talk to. Also friends. One of the things I did was with my home friends in Israel, I set a meeting that I gave them, again, the 5 to 10 first minutes of my job talk, which are more general and more accustomed for general audience, and just heard their opinions on that. And they made me change some of the things there as well.
Let's say if you could rewind to the start of the interviewing season, is there anything that you would have done differently?
One thing that I don't know if it's not something that everyone will relate, but I know that many will, is coping with imposter syndrome and understanding that everyone feels like that. There were some places where I looked at the faculty list before hitting the submit button, and I just had cold feet. I just couldn't apply to places where this person, this very senior famous person was a faculty member. I'm not there. I can't apply there. And I really held back in some cases. The more the season went on, I felt more comfortable doing that, but sometimes some places it was just too late.
Mm.
Um, and this is something I think people should work on this in advance and understand that everyone feels like it. And that's completely fine. And by the time you would get the evidence to give you the support you need to submit, maybe you won't be able to submit anymore. So submit anyway. And yeah, I think that this is the main thing I can advise people, not to be afraid of this season.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I can also agree that everyone, or probably at least myself, I also felt like an imposter several times during the process. So yeah, very relatable. Yeah, let's assume that one of the viewers, or perhaps many of the viewers, will watch this video perhaps 1 or 2 years before completing their PhDs, or even 3 years before. So what things could this person do in order to early on prepare for the interviewing process or for academic position in general?
Yeah, so I think that relates to a couple of things we talked about. The first one is making sure that you have good collaborators that you can later on ask for recommendation letters.
Mhm.
And the second is finding your own research voice and what is the thing that makes you interested in a specific project. And if you can find it early on, you can structure a nice story around it and choose the next projects better.
Any other experience that stuck with you that was memorable besides what we already discussed there? Yeah, negative experience.
Yeah, yeah, I think that overall, even though I had some negative experiences during this season and a lot of emotional stress, it was great experience. I got to talk. This is the one time in your life that you get to speak to so many senior researchers who just listen to what you have to say and to your research ideas. That's not something that's going to happen again in the next couple of years.
Mhm.
So that's a wonderful opportunity. And I got to speak with so many fascinating researchers about potential collaborations, even if I don't become a faculty member in their department, I can definitely see myself collaborate with them in the future. So that was a wonderful opportunity. I remember one place eventually decided not to invite me to an in-person interview, but they told me that that was just because of the topics and the specific requirements of the department at this point, and not because of my research agenda or anything. And one of the interviewers of the phone call just sent me an email later and told me, I now consider myself a fan of your work.
Ah, that's a nice
And
note.
that was such a fun email to get. So you do get to have these type of experiences as well. So this is great.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Any final kind of advice or that you want to share with future faculty candidates?
I think that the most important part is to take care of yourself. It is going to be stressful. It is going to be emotional. All of the people I talked to after this season, when they look in retrospect, they realize how demanding that was from them. So make sure to clear the time to be able to be fully present in this process and to take care of yourself during that time.
Anything else that we didn't discuss and that you still want to chat about, or?
No, I think that's all. It was I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, then thank you so much, Ryuf, and it was also very nice talking to you.
Thank you.